The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
Hey, Michelle.
You would say it the same way. I love it.
Hey, Michelle. Hey, Michelle.
And I'm like, hey.
Do you think that you are a good friend, and why?
I think I have great intentions. I think if you're looking at traits of what a typical good friend, I'm fiercely loyal, I'm supportive, I'm caring, I'm nurturing, all those things. But my actions rarely align with my intentions, sadly. So I think I'm a really shitty friend when it comes to like maintaining contact and staying in touch, and especially with friends that are far away, which is most of my friends, but even ones that are close by. I think life gets the better of me, and I don't reach out as often. So even if I'm thinking of my friends, throughout the week, and I smile and I'm feeling love for them, I'm not necessarily either conveying that to them directly or, making them feel prioritized. That's something I feel guilty about, and also just would love to work on.
Like G.I. Joe says, knowing is half the battle, right?
Yes.
So at least you're aware of it.
Yeah.
You've got self-awareness, right? So there's that, which is good.
Yeah, and conversely, I have some really great friends who are gracious about it and are either in the same boat, either in that parenting vortex that just kind of takes you out of all your other priorities, and are similarly slow to respond to texts or attempts to engage. But then, I have friends who I know I could be more intentional with. How about you?
Probably similar. I think I do well at times. Other times I think I lack a little bit. I feel sad that I've lost touch with people over the years, and I'm aware of it, but I don't quite know how to fix it. Although I will say I just texted a buddy from high school that I haven't spoken to in a while, and we've made plans to hang out. So there is that. I don't think anyone is a perfect friend.
Yeah, it's not even a possible thing to attain. But it's worth thinking the ways I'm either falling short or showing up. That's important information for me. And then also, too, just because life is a hustle and a bustle doesn't mean you can't feel lonely. And so that's particularly when friendships are important to cultivate and maintain.
And in today's episode, we'll talk about quality versus quantity, right? And what that looks like.
Yeah. And even how to start from scratch, I think, because that's the hardest part.
So I'm going to be a good friend to you, and I'm going to say, let's start the podcast.
You're so friendly.
Hi, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Michelle.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle.
I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist for over 2 decades.
And I'm the show producer and co-host.
Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships,
why we do what we do,
and what causes people to unrelate.
Joining us today is Julia Puichevsky. Julia is the senior health reporter on Business Insider's health team with expertise in psychology, relationships, parenting, and skin health. That's a big title, Julia.
Thank you. Yeah.
A lot of topics to cover, but I imagine there's a lot of overlap. Kind of like with our show, we say relationships, but that could mean 1,000 different things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm fascinated in all kinds of relationships, honestly.
So how did you get started with this job? What's your backstory?
I've been in media for pretty much my whole career. I started at BuzzFeed back in the kind of the golden era of BuzzFeed, the quizzes and the videos. And that was really a great place to kind of figure out what I liked. Great time to experiment. So I really was drawn to relationships, dating at that time. Dating apps were still kind of new. So I was fascinated by that. And I moved to Cosmopolitan and worked as a sex and relationships editor. So again, sort of focused on more romantic relationships with friendships sometimes. And then now I kind of cover everything under the umbrella of health. And I've been really interested in the loneliness epidemic in particular, which of course does apply to dating. We talk a lot about that, but also friendship, family relationships, really loneliness of all kinds. And it's something that bothers me a lot, something I'm really curious about trying to find solutions for, and I think a lot of it, unfortunately, is individual actions to be less lonely. So yeah, that's that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's actually a passion of ours as well, which is why I'm really excited to have you on today.
We're in a unique phase of our society where we have this huge illusion of connection because of social media and global, connectivity, but it's kind of a fallacy.
Absolutely. I agree 100% with that. And yeah, I'll mention that later as well. But yeah, I think people listening to podcasts sometimes or YouTube videos, TikTok, all that, there's so much media that you can consume now where you're not even connecting with someone, but it gives you the illusion of, talking to someone or having a conversation where I think it can kind of mask that you are lonely. I think that's something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough. And I see it with all generations, boomers, Gen Z, everyone has their own version of it. And they sometimes don't even realize why they're lonely or that they're even experiencing loneliness.
Julia, you mentioned when dating apps were first getting started. The three of us were around when that happened. Kelly and I have talked about that. It's so interesting because before that, you really had no other choice but to talk to someone face to face if you wanted to meet them. So that shift too is I don't want to say part of the problem, but one of the factors involved in being less connected.
Yeah.
Especially the whole swipe culture, which we didn't grow up with. So
I didn't do that.
Yeah.
I read your story and it was titled, I was horribly lonely in my mid-20s. Then I realized I was a boring, flaky friend. So
I love that.
Love the title. So I read the story and it really spoke to me. You talk about feeling lonely in your 20s when many of your school and work friends were kind of moving away. You were bad at making plans with existing friends and putting yourself out there, and then initiating more and more hobbies actually helped transform your social life. I can really relate to this, especially in my 20s. I moved to a different city, far, far away from where I grew up for my career. And I struggled. I struggled meeting people. I moved to Vegas, which, as I mentioned, is not exactly, it's a fun city to visit, but living there is a completely different experience. And it's very transient. So I struggled a bit meeting people, and having quality relationships, especially in your 20s, because you really want to be social too, And quite frankly, you're really being transparent and vulnerable in this story. So what made you write this story?
So there was an article in, I think it was CNN that was, I forget the exact title. My coworkers and I were sharing it. But it was basically like, maybe you're lonely because you're a bad friend, which I really appreciated because I think we sometimes talk about the loneliness epidemic in this way of like, it's this thing that's passively happening to you. And again, for sure, there are things societally, like we talked about with social media, being more of a thing, or third spaces like malls, for example, disappearing. So there are factors, car dependent cities. It's a little harder sometimes depending on where you live. You mentioned Las Vegas too. I've been there only a few times, but it does seem like that would be a hard place to just go down the street, or because you are so dependent on cars. So there are all these factors that are tied into loneliness, but there are also individual choices that I think people make. And having been through all those poor choices myself, I realized I could kind of talk about it from that perspective of someone who's realized this thing about herself. Like I used to have these not so great habits that I didn't realize were making me lonelier. And here's what I did to change and what the outcome was. And, not overnight, over years and years and years. And it sort of went through phases. But I think that is a lot more palatable for people to read as well, compared to here's why you're lonely. Because I think it's even hard to admit to yourself that you're lonely. It's already easier to read about someone else's experience than admit to yourself that you are, you wish you had more higher quality friendships or friends at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happened here is Kelly could relate to what you were saying, and you put words to something he was feeling, and that was very comforting to him.
It sort of justifies your feelings that this is, it is a struggle, and it's a likability thing too, right? You need to question your likability. Or am I a good person? I think it speaks to something that's universally happening throughout every single generation right now.
But Kelly, you bring up a point. It's you turned it inward and said, maybe I'm not likable. But one of the things I liked about what Julia was sharing is you were, identifying kind of specific routines or behaviors that were exacerbating the issue. So yeah, we on a Friday, if I would rather just sit in my bed and stream a show and have takeout, that might be a choice I'm making that puts me further away from being able to be out there meeting people. So I like how you tangibly kind of showed examples of ways that people's behavior are contributing to the feeling they're having.
Well, and Julie, you mentioned, especially in your 20s, you were very career oriented. I think a lot of people in their 20s are. And so something has to give. There's a compromise. If you're going to devote all your time and energy into your career, you may or may not be able to do that. I think you were a writer at the time, or you're still writing. So you were devoting yourself a lot of your time to that particular, important part of your life, right?
Yeah, I'd studied television writing, so that was very tied to my identity. I really liked working in journalism. That was my first job out of college, and actually my first internships as well. That's just sort of what stuck. I didn't really get many production or internships related to my major, so that was always something I felt very tied to that identity. And even though I was doing fine in my career, I felt I wasn't doing what I studied in college and what I attached to my identity in my career. I was trying to write a web series. I was writing all these little scripts, submitting them to competitions. But yeah, I was living with, she's still my best friend. And we see each other now more often than we did back when we lived together, which is wild. But I would just see her, and I'd simultaneously wish we'd, hang out more as roommates. And at the same time, I would just go to my room and just punch out scripts and then feel lonely. And now we have a different relationship where, we go to workout classes a few times a week. We go to dinner. Even though I just moved neighborhoods too, so we even live further away, but we're more intentional about spending time together.
And then as you got into your 30s, what started to change? You mentioned you started making stronger connections. How did you do that?
It almost depends on which phase you're in. I would say when I was in my feeling peak loneliness in my mid-20s, I really just felt like a lot of my friends have moved away. So I would chat with them and I would call sometimes, but I didn't really have this deep connection or even see them very frequently. And then work changed too. I was just in an office where I just didn't connect, or we just didn't have the same office culture even of going out to happy hours as much. So there were just all these big changes kind of at once. Mm-hmm. So at that point in my life, it was just very important to branch out. So I joined a choir. I joined a musical theater group. I slowly would kind of add more and more things, but that really helped over time. So throughout my late 20s, I was doing more things. I joined a running club. Not everything always panned out where I'd make friends, but most of the time I'd at least meet one person and slowly accumulate more friendships. So I would say if you're in a place in your life where you just feel like you have no connections, that's probably the thing you need to just sign up for one hobby once a week, a class, anything. Running groups are often free or very cheap, or any sort of really anything. I mean, especially if you live in a city, but even if you don't, there are still so many opportunities. But I would say that was very, very crucial for me. And then in my 30s, I was starting to sort of realize, okay, I have good friends. I always sometimes wish we hung out more. And I realized that I was very nervous about reaching out first or making plans or even hosting parties or hosting dinners. I was so afraid of that rejection, or what if it doesn't go well, or what if it's awkward? And there's really no other way to do it than just to do it. And like that exposure therapy, and Michelle, you're a therapist, so I'm sure this sounds all very familiar, but you just have to push through and just prepare yourself for that outcome and know you'll survive it, and then just learn from it and keep going. There are a lot of great books on how to connect with people. And I was trying to do that. And both those things really improved my social life tremendously. I mean, night and day difference.
I've always wanted to do that, host a dinner.
Yeah, it's honestly, it sounds much harder than it actually is, because you don't have to make anything difficult. And I think if you do even like a little theme or just have a few friends over. It's honestly, they've been some of my favorite memories, and they haven't been nearly as challenging as I anticipated in my head.
Yeah, and that anticipation and anxiety of it not working out, or the worst case scenario, no one shows up, or whatever the fears are. I appreciate that you're highlighting that. Yes, you had those fears, and that exposure therapy piece of it, if I do this 10 times and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't, what I'm telling my brain is I'm surviving the times that it doesn't. So that takes the power away from the feeling of fear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, again, it wasn't, I don't want to say it's easier that like I had a New Year's party one year where I thought a lot more people were coming than they were. And then, it just didn't, it just didn't pan out well. I also wasn't very experienced. Neither my husband or I were very experienced at hosting parties at that point. So it just wasn't good.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can openly admit it was not a good party. It was very awkward.
Why? What made it not good?
Well, one, we just had like a very random assortment of people, and then a lot of them were kind of going to multiple New Year's parties. So they were dropping by and then they were going somewhere else. So that was one. People were, one, not really in the mindset to stay, I think, but two, it was just like we bought a lot of last minute snacks that were just sort of like Tostitos, versus now if I were to do that, I would be much more intentional about a theme or like a layout, really create more of an inviting space.
Yeah.
So, and then everyone was just sort of in their corners, but it was a small apartment. So it wasn't like, if it's a big party bustling with people, it's one thing. But if it's like 10 people and everyone's kind of having side combos, it's just awkward. Everyone's sort of shuffling their feet. And I was so acutely aware of all of this too. But at the time, it's too late. You can't fix it at that point. Yeah. So I would do it very differently now.
New Year's Eve is always such a shit show. It's
a lot of pressure,
a lot of expectations, and typically they underwhelm, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. It's one of my least favorite holidays.
It's a phase of life thing too, though. It's very different in your 20s than in your 30s. What kind of party you're looking for.
Yeah.
What kind of crowd you're looking for, what your expectations are.
Exactly, yeah.
Can I go back to something, Kel?
Yes.
Julia, you were mentioning taking a class. You did musical theater, choir. What I really like about that is it's structured time with your friends. Something I wanted to ask you is what advice you might have navigating the flake lifestyle, because part of maintaining friendships is, texting back and forth, promising to see each other, throwing out dates, no one answers, and, just the whole outreach and engagement piece of trying to make plans. So love the structured activity because that takes all of that pressure off. You're like, oh, I'll see you in class and we'll get to hang out and have our friendship. But B, what's your take on the struggle of that piece?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the beauty of the structured activities is, it takes away some of that admin work of texting back and forth. And, especially as you get older, people get busier. And I'll say too, with some of my friends, even if we don't do a structured activity together, we still might add structure to our relationship. So I have 2 choir friends that I write with, and we typically meet once a month. I have another friend who is a new mom. So it means a lot to her when we can go out once a month and get dinner, just us. Her husband watches the baby. And, I just text her first. And I'm like, what about this day? And then I'll pick the restaurant. I take all that work off of her, and then she can have a few hours, on a Friday to feel like nice. Herself again. Yeah. It's wonderful. And honestly, we see each other more than we did before as well, because we just didn't think to do this as frequently before. I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I have another friend who's also a parent. We were writing last night. We also are starting to meet virtually like once a month. And, he lives in Connecticut and has a son. And, we're doing also like virtual writing sessions and also catching up. And we haven't caught up in a long time. So I think even for friendships where you really value the friendship, but for whatever reason you've kind of life has just gotten busy. It's nothing personal. I think it's very easy then to add that structure. And it's low pressure. You can always reschedule, but I find it helps a lot because I don't know about you. It drives me crazy to go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like, this is a question for both of you, do you feel like since the pandemic, the topic of loneliness has gotten so much more newsworthy? And it feels like it's all I hear about now. And I listen to other podcasts too. Michelle, I'm sorry, I cheat on
How
us.
dare you?
I know, but they talk a lot about loneliness, especially how it's affecting men more so nowadays. Young men, older men. I guess I'm a little more sensitive to that being a man. But that said, do you feel like it's really kind of ramped up a bit since the pandemic?
I think it did ramp up, and I have hope, and I feel like things are kind of maybe getting better to an extent, like just with things returning more to normal a little bit. But I don't know. I mean, that's also
Mm.
just an observation in my own life, but
Mm.
and maybe just hopeful thinking, honestly. But
Yeah,
I do think the pandemic. I don't know if you've heard of the movie Eddington. It came out a
hmm,
little while ago,
I
but
heard it. I haven't seen it yet.
I thought it was my favorite part of that movie was just how well it captured the fragmentation of people with social media. And,
Hmm.
it's kind of showing people, whether they're conservative, liberal, right wing, left wing, whatever it was. But it's like almost every shot, there's someone just going on their phone, going on their laptop, tuning into their podcasts, and in their silos. And it's all about 2020. And I just think it really captured that element of 2020 that I think we don't talk about enough. We talk so much about lockdowns and how difficult it was to just not see people in person. But there's this whole other element where everyone was just locked into what their content was, their algorithmic content. And
Mhm.
I just find that to be such a damaging part of our society that I think, and I try to be aware of algorithms too, and I'm still privy to them, right?
Hmm.
Everyone is, and it's
Hmm.
it's so hard. And I think that's just fractured so many relationships on top of making people lonelier in that they're kind of only looking at that content.
Yeah. I agree with everything you're saying. I would add that I think the pandemic sadly linked loneliness and resentment a little more rigidly. The
Hmm.
forced isolation for some people was such a jolt. It kind of created a connection to them of like, the loneliness is being imposed on me versus something that I can do something about.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe there was a regression in being proactive with friendships for some people, not everyone. For some people, that was the opposite effect. But yeah, I think sometimes now this kind of anger and resentment and lack of accountability, blaming other people for what's going on in your life. Some of that was vibing with this idea that
Hmm.
this loneliness is not my fault, which we
Yeah.
talked about earlier with Julia.
I feel like with the pandemic, it forced separation among folks and actually created a sense of fear of other people because
Mm-hmm.
they may be contagious. They may have it. So everyone's wearing masks and we're hiding behind that. It gets in your psyche that you suddenly become afraid of other people for some reason. And you really have no reason to be. But there was obviously that virus itself, right? But the big picture, that goes away. And there's still some fear issues that maybe people didn't realize they even had until that happened. I don't know. I mean, just fear of other folks. But it's funny you mentioned the phone, I know somebody recently who went on vacation overseas and they lost their phone on their very first day of their trip.
Oh
They
no.
left it in a restaurant, didn't get it back until the end of their trip because they were traveling everywhere. And they actually said that they loved their vacation and not having their phone with them.
Yeah.
Bad luck and then in great luck, especially since they got the phone back in the end. Like there's
Mhm.
Yeah.
no harm, no foul. It's just you got a great vacation out of it.
You actually said something, Julia, in your piece. You said, thanks to social media, there are far more ways to feel rejected, whether you get a long text outlining your faults or simply no response at all. And I think, again, that speaks to what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. I interviewed a therapist recently. She wrote a book called "Are You Mad at Me?" And
Mhm.
essentially, it's all about how we had a conversation about how Gen Z, in particular, because they grew up online, kind of you just have more input to feel rejected because, you know, 40 years ago, if you had an awkward conversation with a friend or you felt like you said something wrong, you just had to sit with it until the next time you saw them, or you'd have to call them and just ask. But nowadays you can text them, or you can interpret them not liking a photo or not liking an Instagram story or whatever as rejection, or, oh, they really are mad at me. So you have all this data and information. Same with dating apps, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's you kind of deal with a lot of these micro rejections. Like they don't feel as strong as a, necessarily someone telling you to your face, I don't want to date you. But, if you swipe right on someone and they don't swipe right on you, it adds up, especially if you're in a vulnerable place. Or, let's say you see someone you know in real life on a dating app and you say, oh, okay, I gotta, you're paying attention if they swipe back on you and they don't. That's just a very different experience than actually trying to talk to them in real life and testing the waters. And I just think that that's such a difficult part of a difficult piece of this puzzle as well, is that there are just so many ways to feel even lonely or more rejected, which can then discourage you, ironically, from putting yourself out there even more, because you've already dealt with more rejection than maybe previous generations had.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we're trending towards just being more easily defeated, but what you're talking about resonates with me from things I've heard my clients say in terms of like they give up much easier on things. Well, I put myself out there. I went to this class, to meet people, and nobody talked to me. So never doing a class again, which is maybe more kind of bold or dramatic conclusions being made. And then they give up.
Yeah, and I wanted to say too, there was a recent story in the Financial Times about the big 5 personality traits. So those are the determinants of personality. It's openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and neuroticism. I believe the 5. Yeah. So those are like everyone has levels of those, and your levels determine your personality. And essentially, this new study or analysis of a new study where people self-reported these traits found that Gen Z in particular really is kind of at the worst levels for all of them. They're very high in neuroticism, more than any other generation, I believe. And then they're very low in all the others. And ideally, you should be lower in neuroticism and higher in all of the others to be happier.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have generations of people who are less agreeable, less open, more closed off, and not very conscientious. So that all is going to translate to more loneliness, because who is going to want to hang out with someone who's, closed off, kind of selfish, not very agreeable, not very open. That's hard, And I think that's something that people really need to examine as well. I think you could take that test online, really look at yourself. Am I highly neurotic, and am I not very agreeable? Look at that and ask yourself that.
Would you consider yourself an extrovert or an introvert?
I'm a mix. I think there's like an ambivert, and I always find that's the thing too. It can be more complicated. I'm an extrovert around the right people.
I like that.
Yeah. But if in certain situations I'm like, get me out of here, I need to recharge immediately. So it all depends. Yeah.
What about your husband? Do you guys balance each other?
I think so. I think we're both kind of in the middle, so it works. And he's the same. He's a chatty Cathy if he's like around the right people. He's cracking jokes. He has like he's very funny, and he has kind of an outlandish sense of humor. Around the right people, he really like banters and bounces off with them and has a ton of fun. But yeah, if we're with someone, for example, who's like kind of domineering, takes over the conversation, or someone who you kind of have to like walk on eggshells around or anything like that, he's very quiet, and they almost see a completely different version of him, where they're like, oh, like I'll say, oh, he's really chatty, and they're like, what do you mean? He never talks. So like, yeah, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I think you might be contributing to that dynamic, but yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe we should get your husband on here too. We'll talk about it.
Well, speaking of your husband, well, not specifically about him, but about, your partners in life. This loneliness epidemic is having an effect on relationships. And Julia, I'm sure you've in all the journalism, people talking about man keeping and all of that stuff. But the idea of the less you're actively engaged in your friendships, the more you're relying on your partner to carry that emotional load and fill those needs for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think about that all the time. Like, I think Esther Perel's really popularized talking about this, but just how we used to have a whole village of people that help us with everything, including raising kids. And now we put it all on one person, and there's simultaneously supposed to be this like mysterious, sexy person who's exciting, exhilarating, but also your best friend and you know everything. And also maybe
Right.
a little bit your therapist, and also maybe a little bit your parent, not to be weird. And then, and then
Totally.
you're like,
A little weird.
yeah, okay. So then, you just have this it's like this insane expectation on a person and so much resentment. And at the same time, complete codependence. You can't ever leave because they're all you have. And I just find that to be such a scary place to be in. And sometimes it's difficult, right? You might move together somewhere new and not know anyone collectively. My parents were immigrants, for example. They moved here, didn't know anyone really. So there are situations in which, sure, like you're really more dependent on each other, but I think as much as you can, it's really important to branch out.
We've talked about this topic, Michelle, and I'm sort of being very sensitive. Am I putting extra pressure on my spouse? I'm trying not to, okay, but ultimately I think I'm being more cognizant of that in my relationship, because I don't want to come across as being too needy or needing something from her that I'm not getting from my buddies. There's my therapy session with you, Michelle.
I mean, to me, when I hear that, I get happy, because that's the point of our show, right? Is just reflect and then think, oh, how does this apply to my life? And are there adjustments I want to make now that I have this insight? Great. Yeah.
Back to the loneliness issue, though. I went out this weekend with 3 other buddies. We had dinner Saturday night, and it was really great. And it was just like 4 of us just hanging out, a great dinner, maybe 4 hours. So I guess my point is that I look back on that and like, I need more of that. That to me was so mentally and just emotionally healing and just fulfilling, right? And of course, my wife was over the moon that I do this kind of stuff. But for me, it's necessary, and I think that's something that's lacking. And I realize, you do it, and you're like, why are we not doing this more often? Like, we should be doing this like every other week, but we don't. I think I heard Mel Robbins say on her podcast, one of the most important things for a relationship or friendship is proximity. Julia, you're in New York, and you speak about that in your story about having your friends there and then they're not there. But ultimately, it comes down to how close are you in proximity to your friends? Because you need to have that one-on-one time. You can't text people, and you can't have phone conversations that are ever going to replace that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's great that we live in a time where, especially like we were talking about the pandemic, it was amazing that it coincided with when we have video technology, we have phones, we have texting. In that situation, I think it was so helpful for so many people, especially like my friends who were living alone and sort of stranded in that way without even like physical touch. I think that was such a lifeline to them. But to your point, it doesn't make up for hugging someone. It doesn't make up for going to grab a coffee with someone, or, just seeing friends more effortlessly and regularly, or even having small conversations with people like in line, like the checkout line, or, just down the street. Honestly, I think that's something I'm trying to foster more, is like just getting better at kind of making small talk with people, even if I know, okay, we're not going to be best friends, but just have that more human element to interacting with people, where I don't necessarily need to always have this big outcome out of a conversation, but just be good at talking to people. Because that's something I feel too is a generational difference. I find that, like my mother-in-law, for example, is an expert at this. Like, she's so good at talking to anyone, like the cashier, she'll just strike up a conversation, the waiter, like, and she's so pleasant, and it's so easy for her. And it's just really, really lovely. And I aspire to be more like that, because I think I still grew up in a generation where we're more online, and it just was different. And it's something I'm trying to cultivate, but it's awkward because it feels like a weird muscle I've never flexed. So I have to kind of, again, go back to feeling, okay, I might have some misses. I might start talking to someone who does not want to talk to me, wants to be on their phone, and I'm just going to have to be okay with that and not let it bother me.
Yeah.
Well, that might also be like the neuroticism scale that you were talking about, where these new generations kind of want to know ahead of time if it's going to work out before they try. So it's hard when they can't read the cashier and know whether they want to have a conversation or not. They're like, I just won't then, rather than put themselves out there one way or the other.
Yeah. And I will say that is my biggest flaw in that personality test. Like I do score high in neuroticism, and that is something I work on. But yeah, to your point, absolutely. That's always been kind of the core of my fears of rejection is like, I just want to know how it'll turn out. And I want it all figured out and lined up perfectly. And I don't like the idea of not knowing. I'm not just me. Lots of people are like this, but
Yeah,
it's good to be self-aware. Yeah. And to kind of work toward it, because it does get easier to sit with that uncertainty for sure.
Julie, when you were putting yourself out there, and you talk about this in your story, but when you were putting yourself out there and you were going to like the choir practices or these other social occasions, did you have to force yourself to approach others, or what was that dynamic like initially?
Yeah, I think it was. I honestly feel like a completely different person now because I'm in a different choir now, but I have friends there, and even if I don't, like, I kind of make it a point to go to drinks before or after, or talk to people, and everyone's also very different age groups, personalities, so it really kind of forces you to talk to lots of different people, and I've gotten better at it, and it just feels natural. Honestly, I don't think about it very much anymore. But when I first started, this was in I joined my first choir in 2018. I remember there'd be a 15-minute break, and I would just sit at my chair and I'd look back and I wouldn't be sure if I want to get up and talk to people. And it would be this whole thing. I would just be thinking about it with such anxiety. And then I joined a musical theater thing or a program. Same thing. I remember being so nervous, but I'd gotten a little bit better at that point, so it wasn't so bad. But even the performance level too, I wasn't very confident in the way that now I did a solo at a fairly recent concert, and I just didn't think about it the same way because I just felt more confident. My friends were in the audience, and night and day difference, but it just takes time, sometimes years of just practicing,
Well, that's cool. You're branching out with your singing too. That's very neat.
Thank you. Yeah. I had reached a point where I was more confident when I was in high school because, again, I had done it enough where I'd had that practice, and then I fell out of practice. And you do lose that muscle both, and I think performing to an extent can overlap with talking to people because there's a little bit of having to prepare for the unknown and be okay with, what if people don't like you? So it's a little bit of a similar mechanism in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. The great thing, though, about a club or activity is you're going in, that you have a shared interest. And that is at least one little nugget of, foundation for a conversation to start.
I'm a huge talker, Julia, but for me to get on stage and to sing sounds like absolute nightmare. So kudos to you for breaking through that wall, because that's clear. That takes huge amount of bravery and confidence. Right?
Thank you. Yeah. And again, it's all a muscle. It's I think very few people are just born able to do it. It's you do have to ease yourself into it. It's hard and very clumsy. And again, with all of this, it's just, I think as difficult as it was to go through my 20s feeling lonely and having to push and learn to be different, I'm also grateful for that experience because one, I know if I'm ever lonely again, I know what to do. I will have a solution and already a plan, but I just see other people sometimes and I see them lonely and I know what they need to do. But also I have that grace for them, I think, versus if I always just grew up with a huge group of friends and they all lived in the same city, or I had lots of siblings, or, that some people are just blessed in that way. They just always have their group with them. They've lived in the same place, and they have that strong community. It's wonderful. But I think sometimes the only downside is that, it's you just don't know what it's like not to have that. And I think so that's one thing in a weird way I'm grateful to have because I've kind of come out the other side.
There was a study recently that on life satisfaction or something. And they said what felt more satisfying to more people was not having a friend, but being a friend. And so thinking about who am I a good friend to?
Yeah. That's true. I get more out of being a friend. I was just telling Michelle before you got on, Julie, that I was having this really in-depth conversation with a buddy of mine yesterday who was revealing all these really, really emotional issues he's going through right now. And I just, I'm a listener, so I just was listening and just trying to help him out and have him bounce things off me. But I really enjoyed that. I'm helping him, but you know what? He's helping me too.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your friend, but I think it's great that you're able to help him in that way too. And I think too, like, I don't know, it gives so much color to a friendship too when you can really be there for someone, and it bonds you in this way that I think is just so different than like just getting drinks. And not to say that that's not fun, but all my friendships have always deepened in this really meaningful way when either of us could really be there for the other person.
I like what you say in your story too, and I'm going to quote you again. You say, "More than anything, I've learned that friendships are never static. Some years yield more drastic social circle shakeups than others. Now that I'm entering my mid-30s, more of my friends are moving into even further away and starting families." So I think you touch on a lot of things again that are really relevant to people, especially how friendships are never static.
Well, this past year, I was reflecting, like, I don't even know how many of our friends are either pregnant right now or just had a baby. It's just so even seeing them is just, the things we'd see them so regularly now. And you learn not to take those things for granted because people go through those phases where, okay, now we just won't see them for a while, and that's okay. But accepting that, and then also appreciating the time that you do have, and then kind of saying, okay, I think now is the time. We just moved somewhere else. Let's branch out here. Let's meet people here and get to know people better, and rebuild, create kind of like a new group, because things are always fluctuating. We also want to be parents. So that might involve, when we're ready, meeting parents through different groups, and I think that's something that we're prepared to do. But I think just thinking about that friendship in that light is always super helpful, because people go through so many phases. And I think we also think about, kids and marriage, but there's so many other ways people can change too. A person, your drinking buddy might go sober, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so you now have to change what you do together, and that could drastically change your friendship. And you should, if you're a good friend, you should be ready for that and willing to go along with that. So that there are just so many different ways that I think it's always helpful and healthy. As long as the changes that your friends are going through are good for them, I think it's good to accept that and then do what you need to do to also feel connected.
I would say though, when the time comes to do parent groups, don't be the parents that brag that their kids sleep through the night. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed that there's always a parent in your parent group that can't read the room.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, based on what all my friends are going through, I doubt that we will be those parents. I've yet to meet anyone who's like, yeah, my kid is perfect. It's like they're all struggling and sleep deprived. But yeah, also, wow, I'm sure I'll see some characters in those groups for sure.
You mentioned drinking. It just reminded me of something, because I've heard also, and maybe you've heard this too, but like drinking among younger generations is going way down, like in terms of actual consumption. I would imagine it's affecting like social hour or happy hour, or those times you would go and have drinks with your friends, because drinking is a social, obviously social experience.
Right. I think it's like I think there are very simplified ways that people look at this as, on the whole, a good thing. Because alcohol is not good for your health. It's linked to all these negative outcomes, including cancer risk. So for sure. And people are looking, I think it's similar, honestly, to smartphones too, where parents sometimes would feel, okay, my kid is at home on their phone. They're not out at a party. They're physically safer. Then they're not drinking and driving. They're not, getting drunk in someone's basement. So you think to yourself, okay, there are all these immediate health benefits to abstaining from that. But on the flip side is, I sure maybe drank a little bit too much in my 20s, more than I would have liked. But I also had a great time. I also made lots of friends. And especially for someone who was very nervous, honestly, like it did help. Like I did need the alcohol to kind of loosen me up and be more comfortable and more comfortably myself around people. It's not ideal. I don't recommend that. And over time, that was another thing I had to learn to do was, go to a running club and talk to someone sober while we're running, and put myself through the ringer. Yeah. It's difficult, but it's good to have that awareness. But yeah, to see alcohol as 100% awful, no benefits, I think is a little bit too black and white of a reading on it, because and there's a reason it's so popular among so many cultures in the world too, is it does loosen people up, and it's a hard, moderation is tricky. But yeah, I don't quite know the answer to that, but I do think a lot of Gen Zers are also just not going out at all, you know, alcohol or not. And I think that's a really big problem.
Yeah, I would rely on liquid courage in my 20s to go up and talk to a girl. And, you know, and it helped. No question about it.
Did it?
Oh, it totally helped.
What's your relaxed Kelly line?
You know, as you mentioned running club, ironically, Julia, I met my wife at a gym. So we actually were next to each other doing the elliptical, you know, hey, how's it going? You know, so it actually was kind of a more of a casual way of meeting. But you mentioned running clubs, because I think that's a great way to meet people, or just getting out in nature, exercising, walking clubs, hiking clubs, any of those to me are just fantastic.
I mean, I don't want to be a downer here, but what you had going into your flirtations with your wife was already established social skills. But when generations are growing up without those, and also just kind of more of a fear of other, you know, you could have tried to strike up a conversation with her awkwardly and come off as creepy.
Yep. Yeah. No, you're right. No, I had already built up my skills by that point, because I was like 30.
Right.
So, I experimented and failed in my 20s, and I figured it out. Yeah, exactly.
So I do worry that, you know, younger generations who aren't being as social are not getting the social emotional development in order to have effective and engaging conversations with each other. And then they're quicker to give up. So then they're like, ew. And then.
And what you find too is like so many people crave, like I think Gen Zers know it's a problem. They just don't know how to fix it. And some of them are still quite young. So, you know, they're in high school. They know it's a problem. They don't know how to fix it because this is all they've ever known. And I think that's what's really difficult. So I appreciate that struggle, because for me, I grew up partly online, but, you know, I didn't grow up with Instagram in high school. I had Facebook maybe the last few years of high school and very early iterations of it. So it wasn't, you know, I just wasn't bombarded with as much information as kids have today. And I, for a separate story, actually interviewed some Gen Zers who are part of this growing movement called abstinence, where they're trying to kind of abstain from smartphones, abstain from social media and this whole lifestyle. And it's really brave and it's really hard, because again, their whole world is surrounded and embedded in all this technology. So it takes a lot for them to say, I want something different, because it's also so much harder to even build those skills to talk to people, to read people, to do these hard things when there is just so much temptation to retreat back, you know?
Yeah, it's getting sober, and that is one of the hardest challenges.
I got off Facebook, and initially you're like, oh no, I'm not on Facebook. I'm missing out on so much. And you are, to a certain degree, but you know what? I never looked back, and I don't regret it for a second. And it actually helped my mental health.
Yeah.
I saw so much negativity, and I saw so much vitriol, and especially after the pandemic. I had enough. I had enough. I was done.
Yeah. No, I got rid of Instagram just on my phone. I still have an account, but I don't scroll anymore. And I've just, in general, like I have this app called a brick that it's like a physical magnet on your fridge, and you decide which apps you want it to block. So you tap your phone, and then it blocks them. And then if you want to unblock them, you have to go through the humiliating ritual of getting up and tapping your phone again. I love it. Yeah, I've been using it, and because I'm fine, like during the day, I don't really check my phone, but in the morning and at night, I tend to just, in my head, I'm like relaxing, but I'm not.
Right.
But I feel like that's where I get in trouble, because then I'm scrolling, and then I'm not spending time with my husband, for example, like, especially during the week, we're like working full-time jobs or seeing friends after, like we have very narrow window of time to really spend time together. And then I'm wasting it because I'm, scrolling garbage on my phone, and or reading the news. I'm like, why am I doing this? And same in the morning. So that's something that, yeah, highly recommend. Because like you were saying, Kelly, it's you feel like you're missing out, but are you really?
Mm-mm. You're
That
not.
you're not at all,
No, you're
And
not missing.
we
Yeah.
talked about this before. Schools that allow phones, like even during lunch or recess, you look and all the kids are on their phones, are not talking to each other. And
Mm-hmm.
that very small sliver of kids that don't have phones are actually playing or getting some exercise or like having a fun game where they're
Mm-hmm.
using their imagination.
Yeah.
But the rest are, tech necking it all through lunch.
Oh, it's so horrible. Yeah, it's like a grotesque reality. Like I still struggle to I don't have kids yet, so I only hear about this through other people, but I just like I'll witness it. Like I'll see people's kids on iPads all the time, or like, it's like they're not never away from a screen, and if you take the screen away, they scream, and that they're just seeing that reality, and like that becomes such a norm in our culture. And I'm not trying to blame parents. I think it's incredibly difficult at this point because there's so much pressure when everyone else is doing it too. But it's hard not to look at that. I feel like we're completely like unraveling our society a little bit. Like
Mhm.
it's so bad,
Mm-hmm.
especially when people are already so lonely, so fractured.
Yeah.
AI is now becoming a thing too, where there's not really meaningful guardrails for that yet. The phone bans are very encouraging that we're
Yeah.
starting to do that, and hopefully we can implement them well.
Well, to put a nice big bow on this fantastic gift of a conversation, Julia, you mentioned in your article, you start off by saying, I was a boring, flaky friend. Do you think you're a better friend? And if so, how have you become a better friend?
Yeah, definitely. I think I show up more because, especially with getting rid of social media or severely like cutting down my time on it, I remember details about my friends more. I
Mm.
actually went through because I think a lot of people depend on social media even to know like when someone's birthday is. They wait for that announcement, and
Totally.
now I actually went through every single person I could find and wrote down their birthdays in an app, and I just remember it and I write it
Mm-hmm.
down the old school way.
Yep.
Um, and I think people are even surprised sometimes, like, oh, how'd you remember?
Mm-hmm.
But I think doing those little steps, and then I'm always trying to improve, right? Like I went to like a joint birthday lunch with two friends yesterday, and I didn't expect this, but they got me a gift, and I didn't get them because I thought we were just getting lunch. Like I thought, So
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like, oh God, okay, but I'm going on a trip, so I'm going to get them back, and I'm going to get them something when I come back. A good gift or something because I just didn't think to do it. Been busy, and it's just kind of thinking about little ways of like, okay, I feel like I fell short as a friend. Here's what I can do for future. So just having that, I think even that self-awareness, because before I think I was just sort of viewing friendship as like, oh yeah, we're hanging out. And I see friendship now as something where you do have to maintain it. And even if people are fine and cool, like not giving you any grief, it's like it wouldn't matter if I got them a gift or not, I don't think. But to me it matters because I want to be a good friend and I want to show I'm thinking of them too.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And like what we were saying before is being a good friend feels better than just having friends. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's sort of the thing, and just constantly trying to interrogate that within myself of, am I happy with the friend that I'm being right now? Am I loyal? Am I, even if I speak about someone behind their back, is it because, okay, they hurt my feelings and I'm trying to sort it out, or am I trashing them? Right. All those things of just trying to be self-aware, and or does this friendship feel even? Is this friend always the one reaching out first? Am I not reaching out enough back?
Mm-hmm.
All those
Yeah.
things. You should ask yourself all those things, and if you have that feeling of, I liked this hangout, I like this friend, try to make it a more recurring friendship hangout, or try to find ways to see them more if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's always within your control.
Do you two put expectations though on friends? Like, do you actually say, this is what I'm giving, this is kind of what I expect?
It's hard. I mean, I try not to, because I think and it depends. I think like if things feel really uneven, then I think that's worth paying attention to. Like if you call a friend and they're always going on and on about their life and they barely ask you a question, or they're only asking questions so they could bring it back to them, I think that's totally fair to be upset about that.
Yeah.
And to try to have a conversation about that. But I think like a friend forgets my birthday, it's okay. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't, it's fine. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if I remembered theirs, I'm like, people are busy. It
Yeah.
happens. We're human. I forget birthdays. It's okay. Or I reach out a little bit more often. That's fine. So I think everyone's different, of course. I just think life is so short that I'm like, I'm not I'm really going to
Mm-hmm.
pick my battles with people. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you also gave an example where you have the grace to take on more of a load when you're being a good friend. So that friend who just had a baby and you're like, I'll do all the planning. That's okay. And she'll get a break. And that's so lovely. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
saying like, why doesn't she ever pick the restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
You could easily go down that path if you wanted to.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, it all depends. Obviously, like, yeah, I wouldn't do that with all my friends, like,
Right.
or, it would be hard. But I think, yeah, when you see someone, especially if they're going through a life change or something, it feels good to be that friend. And it doesn't cost me anything to look up the restaurant and do all the planning. And she's also so appreciative. And that's the other nice thing about friends too. I think, you don't always, if you're on the receiving end, I don't think you need to be finding restaurants if you're navigating new motherhood. But I think even just saying thank you and being so clearly happy is like, that means the world to a friend like me. Like, I love that. And
Mm-hmm.
I treasure that so much. Yeah.
And because you're more connected and less online, you notice when a friend is having more of an emotional burden or need. Whereas if you weren't so present, you might miss that.
Yeah. She's not online at all, for example. She's never been online. So she's someone who could easily, if I was focusing only on friendships that are very online or only people I'm seeing on Instagram, she would just slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
And I would be like, maybe checking in once a year. Oh, how's your baby? And that's it. But I just didn't want those kinds of relationships. I found them very hollow. They're very easy to rack up too.
Mm-hmm.
Make little chit chat on Instagram and catch up, and you can feel like you have a lot of friends, but I find so dissatisfying, and kind of taxing too, because there's so much to remember at the same time, that I'd rather have fewer friendships but really feel like I know what's going on in that person's life, and be able to pick up where we left off and things like that. Yeah.
There's something to be said for quality versus quantity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, maybe narrowing it down to, like, I think I heard someone say you can really only manage like 4 or 5 really good friends. I don't know if that's true or not. Some people can probably handle 10 or 12, but I find successfully I can handle 4 or 5 really, really close male friendships. I think, maybe 6 or 7. Okay. but that's still a lot of time, right? That's still a lot of effort. So
Yeah, I think people always talk about, you kind of have to bench someone then if you're going to bring someone in who's new, which happens sometimes, right? You might just not connect as strongly with maybe like a high school friend, and you've really connected with someone in your running group that you really vibe with or you see more often. I think that's fine. It doesn't mean you abandon the other friend, but it's good to keep in mind too, like your own limitations. You just can't hold on to so many people unless you're going to have like the shallowest friendships. But to have even remotely intimate friendships with anyone, you need to keep that in mind. And like, you don't have space for everyone. So who are you giving those 5 or 6 or 7 slots to?
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing. I'll say too, that was a phase I had to go through as well. Was I eventually did feel like I had a lot of friends, a lot of people that I knew, not necessarily all people I would say are even friends, but just acquaintances, tons of people. And I needed to kind of cut down on some friendships. I mean, some were like more dramatic friend breakups. Others were just more like, oh, like I don't connect with you as much, and that's okay. And it's nothing personal, but I just want to devote the time that I have to the friends that I feel the most fulfilled by, and vice versa. And that's also something I think people forget too with loneliness. It seems intuitive to just try to make as many friends as possible, be online all the time, be available all the time. And that's not
No.
the way to do it. It's really like, it's an important part if you don't know anyone, but then once you do and you have that group, to really pare down and figure out who are you comfortable, who are you yourself around, and prioritize that to really feel like you're connected to people.
I think I read like 15 or 20% of young men don't even have one friend. And that just breaks my heart.
I always wonder too if those studies, like the people answering those questions and those surveys, really have technically have friends they see every week, but then once they actually are confronted with that question, say, yeah, but that guy that I see once a week doesn't really know anything about me. I wouldn't consider him a friend, you know? 'Cause it's easy to just kind of go through the motions and do the thing that you're supposed to do, you know, because you have people in or you feel like you've checked that box off. But men are a whole different, you know, they have their own obstacles, I think, in a way of making friends and, you know, both the socialization, but also men are just different, I find. In general, most of the men I know in my life don't necessarily need as many friends as women or don't necessarily have as quantitatively as many friends, but, and they're okay with that, but I think they still need people, you know, they maybe aren't as out extroverted all the time or as social or as chatty, but they do need people and they need friendship. And it makes me sad when men are talking about like being a lone wolf or not needing anyone or being fully 100% self-sufficient, because that's not true. And men need people just as much as everyone else does.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Well, look, I think we could talk about this, Julia, for another hour. I love this conversation. In fact, I got questions I didn't even ask you, but we'll do a part 2.
That's great.
One more reflection that I kept thinking about is how you've come so far in your journey. I think where it really started, though, was that accountability piece, to kind of encourage people who are listening out there to just start taking one step or one reflection, something where you say, I can take control of this piece.
Yeah.
Julia, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate and love your expertise and your insight in this. And thank you for that article. I mean, you may not know it had an impact, but it had impact.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was so great to talk to you both. I could also keep going for an hour. I have so many thoughts on this topic, and it feels great to know that this resonated with people, and that I think, like I'm not alone in worrying. I think in people being lonely or what's causing loneliness, and I think that has made me less lonely. So thank you.
Well, I keep picturing, like, you know, the movie Hitch, doing like a Hitch style consultation business but for loneliness instead of dating, for friendships.
Yeah, honestly,
like
that's a
coaching
great
someone.
idea. I think you got to do it. I don't know.
No, you. I'm talking about you. Just
me?
yeah.
We said we could keep talking to Julia for another hour or two because it was such a great conversation. And I didn't know what to expect, but I ended up getting so much more than I thought.
And what I appreciate about it is it's a topic so worthy of conversation and digging into. And right now it feels like there's just a lot of platitudes out there about the loneliness epidemic and not a lot of solutions or not a lot of connection in terms of reaching out to people and figuring out, how do we change course? We can talk all we want about how it's a problem, but at what point can we really bear down and talk about how to change course?
The good news is I think people are having these conversations right now, and we're not the only ones. I'm hearing it everywhere. I'm hearing it in other podcasts. My Instagram feed, I see stuff. Even politicians are talking about it.
Well, the previous Surgeon General actually named it as an epidemic.
Right. Yeah.
But and you talk about politics. What's that phrase? All politics is local. Like, what I love about Julia and the article she wrote and her insights during our show is she was one person sharing her experience that was chock full of reflection and accountability, but also tangible steps that she took. And you and I really resonate with that, because that's how you start to change the path, is to say, take these baby steps in this direction. And Julia provided a kind of a map on how to do that successfully.
She came across as incredibly vulnerable and transparent in her article, and ultimately, I think, relatable. Everybody can relate to being that person, not knowing people moving to a new city or your friends moving away, or you know, in retrospect, probably was a good thing for our development in some ways, because it does build resilience. Let's face it, we need to have resilience. And it helps later in life, because there are going to be times where you know, maybe you're going to want to be lonely, or you're going to want to have some quiet time. You're going to want to, you know, I enjoy taking, they call it nature bathing, whatever, right? Going out in nature and going for long walks and being by yourself and thinking. That's important too, as part of But, again, when you need friendship, you need to have somebody to lean on and talk to, and you need others' support, it should be there.
Yeah, and the research is clear that life satisfaction is inextricably linked to having meaningful roles. And being a good friend to someone is one of the most meaningful roles you can have.
We call the show Unrelating, but it's about relating. It's ultimately about relating to other people.
I was telling you this, I think we weren't recording, the idea of just overlapping themes. We keep coming up on this issue of connection and loneliness and relationships, and vastly different starting topics in terms of the shows we've been doing. And yet they all kind of crystallize into similar kind of wants and needs of human beings.
Right. The action items that people could take from this, like Julie talks about, joining a club, a running club, having a social outlet, whether it be the choir or church is a big one for people.
Yeah. A structured activity where there's a date and time where people with shared interests are going to be.
When you're in a running club, what's important to you? Well, fitness clearly is important to you. Yeah. So it's finding those resources that are out there.
And maybe not so much trusting your ability to survive the worst case scenarios, but at least keeping your mind open to the possibility that you might survive the worst case scenarios. If you put yourself out there and feel rejected, if you invite someone and they cancel plans, like all these things that could set you back, you will overcome and keep pushing forward and trying.
Being resilient. Don't beat yourself up, and ultimately don't hate on yourself. Just because it doesn't connect with somebody doesn't mean it's the end of the world.
Right. And being accountable and asking yourself that hard question, like you did at the beginning, like, am I unlikable? And the answer is not necessarily yes, you're unlikable, but what are you doing to contribute to the messages you're sending to other people about whether you're open to talking, at the coffee shop, whether you're open to making plans with someone, whether you're interested to engage in a friendship. And behaviorally, like, yes, you may sometimes choose to get takeout and veg at home. I certainly do. If you're feeling lonely, though, what are the behaviors that you're contributing to exacerbate that loneliness versus address it?
Being accountable for your own actions or inactions, like Julia mentioned.
Yes.
Julia mentioned a friend who maybe didn't ask her questions. Well, my approach is I like to ask questions. I am curious about my friends. And I almost feel weird talking about me sometimes. I want to talk about them.
The other thing Julia said and that we talked about was the importance of just face-to-face. So there are some friendships she has where they meet virtually to write, but you can still see the person's face. And that's so important. You were talking about during the pandemic, everyone being masked up, and that did affect people. I heard people say, like, I feel less connected because I can't see that person's face. I don't know what their reaction is behind the mask. I can't tell if they're friendly or not. And it really threw some people for a loop not to be able to read the other person's face.
Yeah, there's science behind that, I'm sure, right? About smiles.
Oh, big time. There's a huge study in the early childhood world called the still face experiment where, the mom comes in and has a neutral face and it just throws the baby completely off.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And they start to have distressing behaviors because they don't understand what's happening. And it's not an angry face, it's a completely neutral face, but just that is so hard for a baby to understand and interpret when they're used to a mom having a smiling face and a happy face. So I think that's happening for a lot of people when they're reading a text or looking at a post. They have no visual context.
You know what I've noticed when I go for walks around the neighborhood or, to the beach? If I'm wearing shades, people don't respond to me the same way when they walk by as if I'm not wearing shades. I've actually done an experiment where I'm wearing shades and I don't get a one-on-one reaction from somebody. And I take my shades off and I guarantee you I get 50% more nods, smiles, or whatever highs than if I do. And so I've actually made it a point now of trying to take off my shades, which seems counterintuitive when you're at a bright beachy area. But
don't sacrifice your corneas. We still have the primitive parts of our brain that biologically are looking for threat to say, is this person safe or not? Are they going to harm me or not? And so when you do take away the visual cues, our brain kind of doesn't know what to make of it. So we err on the side of caution a lot of times. I might not approach someone with shades because I don't know if they're friendly.
That you can't tell if they're looking at you directly.
Exactly, yeah. Which, again, I have to do this PSA. Texting, please do not fight over text, people. I mean,
all right, exactly.
Texting already, you're reading the text from your own perspective, not hearing the tone the person's intending it. And that can already be a cesspool of misinterpretation. Anytime you can get on face-to-face with someone that you're talking to. Well, it was another great conversation. This type of connecting and meeting people like Julia and all the other guests we've had is just very nourishing to me.
Oh, yeah. It gives me hope that people are writing these stories and raising these issues that I think are really important.
So if you're listening and you want to be a guest, please do reach out to us at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com and our Instagram and our YouTube, and just let us know how we can support. If you're struggling with family, friends, or just life in general,
in a bad relationship and wondering what to do,
or you want a relationship and to set yourself up for success,
then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating.
To be a guest, ask a question, or recommend a topic, drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram and YouTube.